The Cook Islands in the South Pacific imports 80% of its food and is experiencing increasing levels of diabetes and obesity among its population. Local agriculture has experienced a number of setbacks, including the loss of agricultural export markets and the reduction of young people remaining on the island willing to work in small-scale agriculture. Furthermore, there is a growing reliance on highly hazardous pesticides, with little or no protective gear and very limited management of runoff or related waste.
In the last 10 to 15 years, there have been a lot of people dying in Tonga of pesticide, cause cancer, diseases, unknown sicknesses. They are my relatives, cousins, and farmers. They are my friends. Their lifespan has been shortened, and I knew very, very well that it would be caused because of exposure to toxic pesticide.
Meaning, because mentality now for our current farmers is that the use of paraquat, to me personally, is a wonder drug for them. What we have been doing in the past, to me, is that we are going more on a chemical warfare against living organisms, whereby we supposed to be going on a biological way of sustaining our kind of lifestyle.
A Rotterdam Convention workshop in the Cook Islands in August 2016 brought together DNAs, farmers, regulators and policymakers, community organisations, health professionals and various NGOs from across the Pacific to discuss alternatives to highly hazardous pesticides and to exchange expertise in small-scale production of high-quality food, grown sustainably in a tropical climate.
For me as a minister, our quest to move forward into the future as having a green economy, green agriculture and everything green. This kind of importation of chemicals, highly toxic chemicals, we need to look at this issue very closely and see how we can address it, how we can minimize the problem that we, the people of the small island states, can feel safe in our own country.
We worked out a program where we were going to identify the highly hazardous pesticides and then link the health impacts and of course the environmental impacts, and then go on to see what alternatives could be done. And some of the participants are able to show that you can farm without pesticides without losing output or production.
Especially among people who are more vulnerable in areas that are more vulnerable, like the Pacific Island states. There's very little space for the pesticides to dissipate. Of course, there's the ocean beyond it, but it will accumulate first in these islands and therefore affecting the population.
Dr. Meriel Watts presented the findings of a report on the nature and scale of highly hazardous pesticide use in the Pacific and available alternatives.
That we found that the total number of highly hazardous pesticides in the Pacific were 89 according to the limited range of criteria that JMPM came up with, and 164 according to the CAN criteria, which includes the environmental and some other health criteria. Of the 19 countries, everybody's got highly hazardous pesticides. There wasn't one country that didn't have them. Then we come to the Rotterdam Convention of Pesticides, and this is just a brief summary of those that are being used, those that are either registered and or being used in the Pacific still. And what stands out, of course, is paraquat. And that's one of the reasons that there's a focus on this workshop on paraquat, because it is being used so widely in so many Pacific countries.
Alternatives to chemical pest control are being pioneered in the islands.
Practices of doing other pest control methods like the mulching, covering the torped, use the kiko and so forth.
Among our farmers, even those who think about, it's faster to use this, the reason why they don't use the chemicals is human health. So in Samoa, which is a very hot climate, very few times have I ever seen someone spraying and wearing protective gear. And so there may have been instances where they've seen that menfolk out there spraying, they're getting sprayed themselves, and then they've attributed illness to that. So actually a lot of our farmers, they have zero tolerance for chemicals anyway. We also have 5 villages that have banned any use of chemicals, and some of those villages banned it right from the start. So what we saw there in that case was just pure leadership to say we don't think this is good for us. They didn't need the science, they could smell it, they could see how quick acting it was, and for them that was a cautionary tale.
Farm visits demonstrated some of the alternatives to chemical pest control being pioneered in the islands.
So even at very low populations, you get this problem, silver leafing. So what we tried to do was to use, I mentioned I think in my presentation that we're encouraging farmers to use oil. And this is mineral oil. We brought in as part of an FAO project last year. And it's, I think it's organically certified. You see the BioGrow logo. We're encouraging a lot of farmers to use it on tomatoes, on many other crops for control of white flies, scales, mealybugs, especially white flies.
We have a project, we have a strong relationship with Paulcom. We're thankful with that relationship. And they're helping us pave a new way or get all the skills and bring different people from different areas in the region to help ourselves establish the trend of moving away from chemical agriculture. But in terms of moving forward in terms of sustainable agriculture, we have to take all of this into consideration. So the long-term goal, I think, to justify the relationship to the workshop is that by having a healthy soil, this is one means of improving that, then there's less chance of us using all the, what is that, H something or?
HHPs.
Yeah. So chemicals.
Use things like herbs and spices or medicinal plants in strips and use those as attractors of beneficial insects, which will then work on things like scale insects and aphids and leaf miners that will feed on the avocados. So you can actually have a cropping row every so often, every 4th row, and those things will bring in the pest.
By bringing stakeholders together, the workshop enabled the sharing of knowledge and experience, and the identification of action to reduce reliance on highly hazardous pesticides in the region.
I'd say in regards to the use of pesticides, and I'm thinking particularly in my country, but it may be similar to others, that there's a talk about reducing the use. However, most farmers, if you give them a product that has less efficacy, if you like, I would bet that they'll double it or they'll find some way to boost it. To me, this is a leadership decision in saying what is good for my country, the environment, what is good for the next 4 generations and for health. And sometimes just putting a line in the sand and just saying no more. We did it when it came to the ozone layer and CFCs. We said, look, this is no good for the world. We have to stop doing this. Well, this is actually no good for the world as well, and we have to stop doing it.
And therefore, a diversity of crops and diversity in terms of the types of not only crops but also animal, building into a diversified farm and managing it in that sense, I think would be much more useful for the Pacific Islands.
Well, we have, as a country, we have acceded to the Rotterdam Convention, the Basel Convention and the Stockholm Convention, but we have not yet translated the articles of those conventions into our legislation. So I'm hoping at the end of the workshop we will have recommendations to incorporate the legislation of the conventions we have signed up to into Cook Islands law, and then, as one of the other participants said, create a regional pesticides control authority, revive the Rarotonga Pesticides Board, perhaps with a broader base, and just take more steps to implement the Rotterdam Convention.
We need as many tools as possible We need local initiatives at the community level, we need national initiatives, we need regional initiatives, and we need, of course, the international initiatives so that we can have a better international instruments where national governments can turn to for support, and also some other sectors would have a better chance in pushing for certain policies if they have the backing of international conventions, for example, of Rotterdam Convention or Stockholm Convention. So they need to be integrated together and be coordinated in a scheme of complementary work and not antagonizing each other, hopefully.
We do not have the scientific, the resources to test and make decisions on these harmful and pesticides, and if the Rotterdam Convention and just all the major conventions can sort of intercept this before it comes to our region will be quite helpful. And also to acknowledge the work that the governments have been doing in terms of the pesticide registration systems in each countries. That needs to be strengthened, and they need capacity building. They need to understand the chemicals that they are approving. So it's the whole, from the health side, from the environment side, from the agricultural side, all that, and I believe there's a gap for and for capacity building on those areas. Yeah.
I think in the Pacific Island, community monitoring on impact of pesticides, I think would be really possible, and I think that there is interest in some countries to explore that possibility. And I think that will provide some of the slow evidence building coming from the community in terms of the impact of pesticides on their health and the environment. And I think that documentation would be a basis of some action at the community level, and maybe governments can take action in learning more about what's happening in terms of impact of pesticides.
When you're dealing with growers, farmers and gardeners, they're quite often people that are not interested in books or university research. They like to see, to touch, to smell, to do. And so bringing people together in this forum is really quite a revelation to a lot of people. They're realising, oh, you're doing the same as us, or you may be doing better than us, or we could do that as well. All sorts of wonderful things happen. There's this sort of cross-pollination that goes on when you bring people together. It's not just using beneficial things like composts and reducing the use of pesticides, it's biodiversity management. And this is the second level of sustainable farming. And if you can identify what insects and animals are your friends, which ones are your enemies, and the majority of which are just simply biodiversity, things that just happen to be there, then you can make considered decisions about which ones to encourage. And I think it's really necessary for the South Pacific to pool together because the flora and the environments around here, the ecotypes, all those things are relatively harmonious, that you could actually do that from one website, one set of scientists, not one for each country.
I think it's very important also for us to take this forward in making that change, is to work with the schools to enhance that collaboration with the schools. So I think we really need to come down to the schools, start from the primary school, even as far down as kindergarten. And I know there has been some successful programs in Australia and New Zealand, and we can use these programs. And for us to really take this forward in making that change and bringing that change on board is the need for agencies, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector. There is a need for us to enhance or strengthen that collaboration.